Germany and Austria agree to boost the EU border force as divisions heighten over immigration. Is it a sign of increasing or diminishing common ground? And to what extent is the far right reshaping the bloc's migration policy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Well, it's an issue that has divided Europe for years. Undocumented migration. Almost 2 million people have risked their lives crossing the Mediterranean Sea since 2014. This movement towards Europe continues to take a devastating toll on human life. Thousands died during their desperate journey. Several policies on border control and restrictions have seen a decrease in the number of refugees and migrants, but members of the European Union still can't agree on what to do with them. Laura Burden-Manley looks at a polarising subject within the EU and if common ground can be found.
10,000 more troops. That's the number of border guards the European Commission is calling on to tackle illegal immigration into Europe. An issue that's divided EU members, bringing tensions to boiling point.
External borders must be protected more effectively, so we're proposing that the number of border guards financed by the European budget in 2020 to reach 10,000.
The UN High Commissioner for Refugees says refugee and migrant numbers are sharply down from their peak 4 years ago. But the reasons why almost 2 million migrants have headed to Europe since 2014 remain: to escape conflict, persecution and economic hardship. Several far-right leaders in Europe have taken a hard stance on anti-immigration, including border closure causing many verbal outbursts. On Friday, Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini exchanged a war of words with the Foreign Minister of Luxembourg after Salvini referred to African migrants as slaves.
I hear some of my colleagues saying that Europe needs immigrants because its population is ageing, but I have a completely different perspective. I think I'm a government paid by our citizens to help our young people to start having those children again, as they did a few years ago, and not to take the best of the African youth to replace Europeans, who are no longer having children for economic reasons. These are two completely different worldviews. Maybe in Luxembourg there is this need. In Italy, we feel this need to help our children to have children, not the need to have new slaves to replace the children we no longer have. So we are willing to engage in dialogue with everyone.
Hey there, that's going too far.
I calmly respond to your point of view that it is not my own. If you need new immigration in Luxembourg, in Italy, I prefer to help Italians to start having children again.
In Luxembourg, we had tens of thousands of Italians. They came as migrants. They worked in Luxembourg, so that you in Italy would have the money for your children.
This row came after a defiant Hungarian Prime Minister vowed to continue to challenge EU rules on migration. This after the European Parliament voted overwhelmingly to trigger for the first time a sanctions procedure against a member state, Hungary, because of claims it breached EU rules on democracy and civil rights.
Let's speak clearly. Hungary is going to be condemned because the Hungarian people have decided that this country is not going to be a country of migrants. With due respect, but with utmost sincerity, I reject that the pro-immigration and pro-migrant forces of the European Union should threaten and blackmail and smear Hungary and the Hungarian people based on false allegations.
EU members agree an urgent overhaul is needed, but are divided on what steps need to be taken. Some countries are pushing for tougher external border controls, others for fairer distribution of new arrivals. A summit between leaders on Sunday will prove if cooler heads can prevail and solve the growing issue, or will it continue to deeply divide the EU? For Inside Story, Laura Burden-Manley, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's bring in our guests into the show. We have joining us from Berlin, Thorsten Benner, the co-founder and director of the Global Public Policy Institute. In Paris, Schams El Ghoneimi, policy advisor at the European Parliament. and in Swindon in the United Kingdom via Skype, Marianna Karakoulaki, a researcher on migration and co-editor of Critical Perspectives on Migration in the 21st Century. A warm welcome to everyone in the show. If I could start with Thorsten then. So the leaders of Austria and Germany, they want to focus on boosting Frontex, we're told. Is the European Union border force, a solution to the migration challenge?
I mean, that's the centrist hope. Mrs. Merkel has adjusted her views and is very much in line now with what the Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz said in 2015.
Is that hope well placed, though,
We need to
Thorsten?
secure our... No, I think it's a reasonable compromise, but we shouldn't have any illusions, because the far right or the authoritarian nationalists, starting with Mr. Orban, Mr. Salvini, the people we've heard about just now, they have no interest whatsoever to solve the issue of migration. The issue of migration for them is an important rallying cry to fuel their authoritarian nationalist revolution or counter-revolution that they're staging in Europe against the values of 1968, that meaning a more open, diverse Europe, and the values of 1989, an authoritarian revolt against liberal democracy, which became the currency for the continent.
Thorsten, let me jump in, if I may, and put to you probably the counter-argument that they would make is that since the European Union can't come up with any sort of common policy to deal with this issue, why should countries on the periphery shoulder the burden alone, so to speak?
Yeah,
that's the narrative from Italy.
Exactly,
and
there was a lot. Yes, and the complaints from Italy for that have been well-founded. We left them alone. There was a lot of hypocrisy on the part of Germany, leaving Italy to deal with the arrivals. That's all fair and fine. But now that we've come around and said, like, we want to boost external border protection, that should be a consensus thing. Mr. Orban said, oh, I don't like the idea of having Frontex with all this mandate and people and manpower. I want my own border guards to have sovereignty and so on. So he makes this sovereigntist counter-argument against a coherent European approach to border protection just because he wants to safeguard his own little interests, and he wants to keep this divisive issue alive, because this divisive issue is important for him, because he wins elections on his illiberal, xenophobic, anti-Muslim platform. And the worst thing that could happen to Mr. Orban would be that we have, in quotation marks, dealt with the migration issue or the refugee issue, and is no longer the dominant issue of the day. He has a vested interest in keeping it like that, and that's why he doesn't support a sensible approach.
All right, I think you put your finger on a very important point, and that is the divisions within the EU. I want to come to that in a moment, but before we get into that, I want to ask Shams. The other sort of major policy push was supposed to be not only on supporting Frontex, but opening up new processing centres, cooperating with North African countries in trying to stop people coming to Europe. Do you think that sort of approach can help?
I mean, hello, everyone. I totally agree with what has been just said. And your question on the new hubs that EU member states are trying to at least create in theory stumbles upon a main obstacle, which is that on the southern tip of the Mediterranean, we have Libya. Libya doesn't have a political solution yet. And as long as Libya's own structured institutions do not exist, we cannot rely on any partnership. And so, many people might believe that the EU is concretely actually thinking of having hubs in Libya. But in practice, there are no such centers funded by the EU.
Let me jump in. Forgive me for interrupting you too,
working
Shams.
at the UN
Let me
Security
present
Council.
to you the counter narrative to that as well, amongst particularly the right in Europe right now, is that why should Europe be responsible for the political structures of other countries? Isn't it enough to open up processing centers as long as standards are maintained there and they're in line with European values? Europe can't be responsible for the entire political structures in the rest of the world.
Well, I was a political analyst in the Middle East, and the amount of refugees hosted by the Lebanese, the Turks, the Jordanians, the Iraqis, from Syria is absolutely incomparable with the 1 million, representing only 0.4% of the EU's population, that the EU has welcomed. So I think that we shouldn't actually bend to the rhetoric and the smear mongering made by the far right, basically. We should actually stand by our reasons, stand by the statistics that show that refugees aren't that many, migrants aren't that many. They're actually an economic benefit to us as long as we invest in them. And most importantly, they are not a security threat. This is the most important message that Europeans need to understand. 250 days before European elections, more and more Europeans actually believe the far right's ideas that there is an actual link between being a foreigner, being a Syrian refugee or Muslim, and being a threat to public order. And that has been proven wrong, not by myself, but by the intelligence services of Germany, by the French police. We can definitely see statistically that a refugee is as dangerous as a standard European. You can be good, you can be bad. That is not the issue. And as long as
Shams,
people
what about the argument that the current policy of just allowing in large groups of people may not need the meet the economic interests of countries like Germany, that while these economies do need people to make up gaps in their workforce, they should be choosing the more skilled labor and the types of people that are really needed rather than just allowing everybody in, so to speak?
Well, interestingly, the European Parliament has already suggested, to answer your question, a very strong EU position welcoming migrants on specific conditions, which are that they should go to places that actually have jobs. That goes without saying, and this is the current Königstein system in Germany, whereby a refugee is going to be sent to a region in Germany that actually has economic prosperity. Not to Sachsen, where you have neo-Nazi protests at the moment, because we know that Sachsen is struggling at the moment economically. So we actually have the solutions. The European Parliament has already positioned itself for family reunification and automatic redistribution of asylum seekers across the EU. However, our own member states are blocked. Why? Because of a minority of far-right governments, which, as our previous speaker just said, are basically not looking for any answer.
Talking about our previous speaker, I do want to bring Marianna in, but I can see Thorsten is shaking his head in disagreement. So bear with us for a minute, Marianna. Let me give Thorsten a quick 30 seconds to come in.
Just 2 quick points. I think you misrepresented the German system because asylum seekers are distributed across the country according to a certain scheme, but people go to Saxony as well as other parts, regardless of the prosperity of the region. So they're distributed everywhere. And more importantly, I think it's really, really, really important to make a strong division between, or dividing line between those who we want to attract because we think they should become part of our workforce, and we should have regular immigration laws for that. And those who come in because they're needy, because they need protection, because they have the status of refugees. I think it does a profound disservice to the debate if we mix the two arguments. There should be one track that should be for economic migration, and we should have all sorts of criteria for that. And there should be another track, preferably via direct resettlement, that should be for people in need who need protection. But we should really make a difference between these two ways of coming to Europe.
That's a very important distinction. Of course, a lot of the people who, at the height of 2015, were entering into Europe, at least a sizable portion of them, no doubt, were escaping from countries in conflict. Just to clarify, I am presenting, as I said, the counter-narrative of the right wing without that necessarily meaning that's what I believe, and I'm glad it's provoking a good debate and different response from our panelists here. Let me move to Marianna then. Schams kind of touched on an important point he hinted at. The numbers of people coming to Europe have declined since 2015. One would think that this problem should be decreasing. Why are divisions heightening only further right now in the European Union over it?
The numbers have declined, but they haven't stopped. And we have noticed the past couple of weeks, for example, in Greece, they're rising again. And last weekend, 519 people have arrived. This is something that triggers the far right, And because, as the previous speaker said, they use migration for their political gains. They don't really care about stopping migration or finding a solution to migration. They're using this issue to gain votes internally and possibly in the European for the European elections as well.
That's so. What's happening, Marianna? Do you think to that June agreement that was announced, where supposedly EU leaders had come to an agreement on voluntary processing centres inside and outside the EU, voluntary sort of quotas for settlements of refugees? Is all of that over, really? Are we seeing the unofficial demise of that agreement and a descent into what, if we are?
I think yes, because they did announce these processing centres, but half of the European countries said that they will not accept these centres. And where will they build them? Will it be Libya? It's impossible with what's going on. Egypt, I don't think that they will accept, or they said that they will not accept. Will they make more similar centers in the Aegean Islands? I don't think that there is any more capacity in the Aegean Islands. And what about, maybe they will do them in Turkey, but I don't think that anyone can cooperate with Turkey. So I think this agreement has failed. And one of the reasons that they will have an unofficial summit in a couple of days is to discuss a new plan. So we will have to wait and see what this new plan will be. But possibly they will try to expand the Frontex mandate even further.
Okay, I can see Schams wants to say something. Let me give him a chance to come in before I move on.
Yes, I just wanted to add on this that actually we already have a system of hubs where migrants in Jordan, in Turkey, get visits from the EU, from Germany, from Canada, within the framework of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. And within that framework, dozens of thousands of Syrian and Iraqi refugees have been relocated from Jordan or from Lebanon or from Turkey to the EU or to Canada. That already exists. And the main issue that we're discussing is not creating new hubs where that is absolutely not possible in Libya. The main issue is actually addressing the relocation within the EU. How do we effectively enforce the basics of the EU treaties, which say that every member state has to show solidarity and share the burden? And therefore, why doesn't Austria, and actually Austria does, but why doesn't Hungary, Slovakia, Poland apply the basic rules? And that is why the European Parliament last Wednesday has, as you said, started the mechanism to actually freeze the voting rights of Hungary as long as it does not respect basic EU law.
Okay, I'm glad we've kind of come back a full circle to a point I wanted to raise with Thorsten, a point you raised, Thorsten, a moment ago, the divisions. We've seen the sort of EU action, parliamentary action against Hungary, which Poland is vowing to disrupt any sort of sanctions against Hungary. We've seen Hungary make similar pledges to protect Poland. We've seen Italy's interior minister say sanctions against Hungary would be crazy. So there's kind of like a stream of countries lining up on one side, and then you have on the other perhaps Luxembourg and France. Are these disagreements over immigration forging new alliances and creating new divisions within the EU?
And you have a division between centrist forces that includes the European People's Party that voted against Mr. Orban, that until now is still a member, and the Social Democrats, the Liberals. And you have the authoritarian nationalists. And they feel that they have a lot going for them. And Mr. Orban, Mr. Salvini, they've now vowed to form an anti-European, pro-nationalist, pro-authoritarian alliance. So it's not necessarily it's new division, but it's not just about
will that redefine the EU or break it up? I mean, where do you see this going?
It will mess with the EU. It will make policy. I mean, policy making in the EU is getting more complicated by the day. So it will turn the EU Parliament, depending on the outcome of the elections, into a very big, acrimonious mess. And they will, they will like that. They will relish that these right-wing forces, because they want the EU to fail.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
They will go against, yeah, Schams, please.
Yes, I was saying, can I give you one example? So as I have worked in the European Parliament for a number of politicians from Germany and the UK and France, you can see that the far right in the current mandate has been very destructive in its attempt to derail legislation. So for example, helping out Syrian refugee children in Turkey by giving them funds to have schools and teachers and better living conditions so that they do not actually try to leave Turkey to have actually a better future, would sound like a very logical solution. Well, UKIP, the far right in the UK, as well as the far right in other countries, such as in the Netherlands, voted against increasing EU funding to build schools for Syrian refugee children in Turkey just because they're racist. And that kind of obstacle that we're facing in the European Parliament is not big enough to
they're not
prevent
racist, but they see better things
that,
to do with EU taxpayer money. Just to put the counter-argument again, not necessarily what I subscribe to.
Yeah, but they need to have a majority for that.
Well, I mean, if they're worried about EU taxpayers' money, they should start working at 10 meetings.
Thorsten, let's give Schams 20 seconds to come back in on that, and then we'll move on.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
I mean, regarding taxpayers' money, they've done the worst disservice to the UK by pushing it on the cliff's edge by Brexit. You know, that is going to cost the UK and has already started to cost the UK a lot of money. So I don't get to listen and have any economic lesson from UKIP.
Okay. Thorsten, let me give you a brief 20 seconds because we need to get Marianna in again.
Just, I mean, because I think after May, they will have the numbers to be really destructive and blocking things. Right now, we haven't seen much yet. But it's also really important, the action against Hungary that we've seen and against Poland on Article 7 is not on their stance on migration and lack of solidarity. The action is actually on their stance undermining an independent judiciary, independent universities. These are all laws that Hungary and Poland have passed that the EU has taken issue with because it's against the mutually agreed values. This is not a procedure that deals with immigration. So we really need to get this straight.
All right, so Thorsten, they're saying that they'll have the real numbers to be destructive after May. Marianna, I wonder if you agree with this statement by Italy's Minister of Interior, Matteo Salvini, which I think kind of is related to what Thorsten is hinting at here, when he said, quote, "I am convinced that in a few months we are going to govern Europe together with Orban," referring, of course, to the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. Rather than a breakup, might a takeover be on the cards?
No, I don't agree with that. We will see, in order to say something final, we will have to wait for the elections, but two countries cannot rule over the whole European Union. So we will have to see how much power...
Might there be more? I mean, Poland is on the same side, you know, maybe more than a few countries now which are shifting towards the right wing that might be able to redefine the whole essence of what it means to be the EU.
They are shifting to the right wing, but I don't think that they are shifting to fascism like Hungary and Italy. And the EU has changed anyway. It has turned into a right-wing organization, I would say. Mm-hmm. But there are still some countries, when it comes to migration, I should note, but there are some countries that will still try to fight the rise of fascism, for example, France. So what I'm seeing in Europe at the moment is two poles. It's the French pole and the Hungarian pole, and we will have to wait until the elections to make some final remarks and conclusions.
All right, I guess time...
But I don't think the far right will be able to rule over the whole Europe, no.
All right, I guess time will tell, and we will see, and no doubt we'll be back again to discuss this. For now, I'm afraid time is out. So let's thank our guests, Thorsten Benner, Schams El Ghoneimi, and Marianna Karakoulaki. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, or for further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami, Zeidan, and the whole team here. For now, it's goodbye.